I lay on the cold kitchen floor, my hand clutched to my side where waves of sharp pain were radiating through my body. It felt like a knife twisting inside me. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, stood nearby, her small face etched with fear. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lily's voice quivered, barely above a whisper. I tried to sound reassuring, despite the agony. "I'll be fine, honey. Just a bad stomachache," I lied, attempting to mask the severity of my pain. Footsteps echoed through the hallway as my husband, David, appeared in the doorway. His expression was one of annoyance rather than concern. He was all set for his trip, suitcase in hand. "What's going on, Evelyn? Why are you on the floor?" David asked, his voice tinged with irritation. "I think it's appendicitis, David. It's really bad. We need to go to the hospital," I managed to gasp out, each word punctuated by pain. He scoffed at me. "Appendicitis? You're probably overreacting. It's likely just indigestion." "But David, I really think—" My words were cut off by a sharp jolt of pain, causing me to wince. David checked his watch, his impatience palpable. "I can't miss this trip with Rachel. Just call a taxi or something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "David, I can't even move. Lily's here. I need you," I pleaded, my voice laced with desperation. He shook his head, unmoved. "I'm sure it's nothing. Call if it gets worse." And with that, he left, his suitcase trailing behind him. I was left alone, in pain, with Lily. Lily's small hands found mine, her tears mirroring my own. "Mommy, don't be sick. You have to be okay." I gathered what little strength I had, pulling Lily close. "I'm here, darling. Mommy's here." With David out of the picture, I knew I had to take action. Shaking hands fumbled for my phone, and I dialed the only person I knew I could count on, my brother Michael. The phone rang, its sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. "Hello?" Michael's voice was a beacon of hope. "Michael, it's Evelyn. I need help. I think it's appendicitis. I can't move and Lily is frightened," I said, each word a struggle. There was a brief, stunned silence, then Michael's voice, steady and strong. "I'm coming right now. Hold on, Evelyn. I'll be there as soon as I can." Leaning back against the cold tile, I closed my eyes, trying to keep the pain at bay. Lily cuddled up to me, her presence a small comfort. In that moment, a resolve formed within me. David's abandonment in my time of need would not be forgotten. It was a deep cut, a betrayal that marked the beginning of a change. As I waited for Michael, one thing was clear. Things would never be the same. I was going to make sure of it. As I lay in the hospital bed, the sterile white walls and the soft beeps of the machines around me felt strangely comforting. The surgery for my appendicitis had been a success, but the emotional wound left by David's abandonment was still raw. I had managed to call my parents to take care of Lily while I recovered, their voices filled with concern and unspoken questions about David's absence. 3 days later, I was back home, the physical pain a dull reminder of the recent ordeal. Lily, her face brightening at my return, ran into my arms. "Mommy, you're back. Are you all better now?" Her innocent question tugged at my heart. "I'm getting there, sweetie," I replied, hugging her tightly, grateful for her presence. The calmness of our reunion was shattered the next day by the sound of the front door banging open. David and his sister Rachel stormed in, their voices raised in frustration. "Why didn't you pick us up yesterday? We had to spend extra on a taxi and train fares." David's voice was loud and accusing as he entered the living room. I felt a surge of anger at his audacity. "Welcome back. You must have had a tough time," I said coldly, meeting his gaze with a glare. David stopped in his tracks, surprised by my icy reception. Rachel, too, seemed taken aback by the tension in the room. "What's with the attitude, Evelyn?" David demanded. I couldn't hold back any longer. "While you were off enjoying your trip, I was in the hospital," I said, my voice steady but seething with anger. "And you, Rachel, always demanding David's time without a thought for his family." Rachel's face reddened, and David looked bewildered. "What are you talking about? You were okay, right?" he retorted, his tone dismissive. "It's not just about being okay, David. It's about being there when your family needs you," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. Before David could respond, the living room door opened, and in walked Michael, our parents, and David's parents. 14 eyes filled with varying degrees of anger and disappointment were fixed on David and Rachel. "Why is everyone here?" David's voice faltered, his confidence waning under their collective glare. I took a deep breath, channeling my pain and betrayal into words. David, you left me and Lily alone when we needed you the most. I had to be hospitalized, and you weren't there. I've told everything to both our families. David seemed to shrink under the weight of my words, his usual bravado nowhere in sight. His eyes darted around, seeking an ally, but found none. It's not just about this one incident, David. It's about all the times you've put Rachel's needs above your own family, my brother Michael added, his tone laced with disappointment. Rachel, usually so confident, looked uncomfortable, her gaze shifting from the floor to the angry faces around her. David tried to defend himself, his words a mix of excuses and feeble attempts at justification. The confrontation was intense, the air thick with tension. But for me, it was a turning point. I realized that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of David's neglect. It was time for change, time for me to stand up for myself and Lily. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the message was clear. I had the support of both our families, and David's careless facade had been shattered. As they left, David's parents gave me a look of sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of their son's failings. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a newfound strength. David had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to take control of my life. The days following the confrontation were heavy with unspoken words and tension. David tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the air between us was thick with the unsaid. I spent those days reflecting, realizing the depth of my unhappiness and the need for change. The decision I came to wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, like a breath of fresh air in a long stifled room. One evening, as David sat on the couch, nonchalantly flipping through the TV channels, I walked up to him, a folder in my hand. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What now, Evelyn?" I took a deep breath and handed him the folder. "I want a divorce." David stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and mockery. "Divorce? Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. You're overreacting." I shook my head, feeling a sense of empowerment growing within me. "It's not an overreaction. I've thought about this a lot. You've constantly put Rachel and yourself before me and Lily. I can't live like this anymore." David's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can manage on your own? Don't be naive, Evelyn." His words were meant to wound, but I stood my ground. "I'm not naive, David. I'm aware of what this means. But I'd rather face that uncertainty than continue feeling invisible in my own marriage." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Good luck, Evelyn. You'll come crawling back once you realize how hard it is out there." I felt my anger rising, but kept my composure. "I won't. This is my decision, and I'm sticking to it." For a moment, David looked like he might argue further, but then he shrugged, an arrogant smirk on his face. "Fine, have it your way. But remember, I warned you." As he turned back to the TV, dismissing me once again, I felt a mix of emotions. There was fear, yes, but also a liberating sense of freedom. I was finally taking control of my life, stepping out of the shadows. The next day, I began the legal proceedings for the divorce. It was a daunting process, filled with paperwork and legalities, but I was determined. My parents and Michael were supportive, offering help and encouragement. During this time, David's true character became even more apparent. He was dismissive and uncooperative, trying to intimidate me into backing down. But I stood firm, bolstered by the support of my family and the growing realization of my own strength. As the days passed, David's facade began to crumble. The charming, confident man I had married was revealed to be selfish and manipulative, his true colors exposed for all to see. The divorce proceedings were tough, but I faced them head-on, each step forward a testament to my newfound resolve. I was no longer the woman who lay on the kitchen floor, ignored and in pain. I was a woman reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her happiness. The divorce was a grueling process, marked by David's attempts to undermine and belittle me at every turn. He would often sneer during our meetings, making snide remarks about my capabilities as a mother and my future without him. But his words, once so debilitating, now only fueled my determination to break free from his toxic grasp. "Enjoy your life of struggle, Evelyn," David taunted during one of our final meetings. "You'll soon realize how good you had it with me." His arrogance was infuriating, but I kept my composure. I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment with someone who has so little regard for his family, I retorted, my voice unwavering. David's smug expression faltered for a moment, replaced by a flash of anger. He quickly masked it with a scoff, but I could tell my words had hit their mark. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I was free from David, but the journey ahead was daunting. Yet, as I walked out of the courthouse, a sense of liberation washed over me. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, David's life began to unravel. His neglectful behavior and the divorce became the talk of his workplace. Colleagues who once admired him now looked at him with a mix of pity and disdain. His charming facade had crumbled, revealing the pettiness and selfishness beneath. Word of our divorce and the reasons behind it spread through our community, thanks largely to my cousin, a well-known figure in our neighborhood. David, who had always prided himself on his image and reputation, found himself the subject of whispered conversations and judgmental glances. Rachel, too, faced her share of backlash. Her interference in our marriage was now public knowledge, and friends and neighbors began to view her with suspicion and disapproval. The bond she once shared with David, unbreakable in her eyes, was now strained and awkward. One evening, while picking up Lily from school, I overheard a heated argument between David and Rachel outside their house. Their voices were laced with blame and resentment. "It's your fault we're in this mess, Rachel," David yelled, his frustration evident. "How dare you blame me? You're the one who couldn't keep your family together." Rachel shot back, her voice high with anger. Their argument was a stark contrast to the united front they once presented. The seeds of discord sown by their actions had finally borne fruit, and they were now reaping the consequences. As I walked away with Lily, I felt a sense of vindication. David and Rachel were finally facing the repercussions of their selfishness. It was a harsh lesson, but one they had brought upon themselves. That night, as Lily slept peacefully in her room, I sat by the window, reflecting on the past few months. The journey had been difficult, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-respect. I had fought for my dignity and for Lily's future, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt ready to face it with newfound confidence. In the aftermath of the divorce, life settled into a new rhythm, one that was quieter but more fulfilling. The shackles of my unhappy marriage were gone, and in their place was a newfound sense of independence. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece, with Lily by my side. My first step was to secure a job. The gap in my resume, due to years dedicated to motherhood, was a concern, but I was determined. After several interviews, I landed a position at a small accounting firm. The firm was run by a woman who believed in supporting working mothers, and the environment was understanding and flexible. It was a perfect fit for me. Lily adapted to the changes with the resilience that only children possess. She started kindergarten, her days filled with new friends and learning. Her laughter and chatter filled our home with joy, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had pervaded it before. But the echoes of my past with David were not completely silenced. One afternoon, while dropping Lily off at school, I overheard a group of parents whispering, "That's her, Evelyn. Heard her husband left her because he couldn't stand being around her anymore." Their words stung, but I held my head high. The gossip and judgment were small prices to pay for the freedom and peace I now had. Meanwhile, David's downfall continued. His pride had taken a significant hit, and his once spotless reputation was now tarnished. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had moved back in with his parents, a fact that he tried to keep hidden but eventually seeped out. Rachel's situation was no better. Her meddling in our marriage had alienated her from many of her friends. The once inseparable siblings were now barely on speaking terms, their relationship strained by blame and regret. As for me, I found solace in the support of my family. My brother, Michael, moved closer to us, and his presence was a constant source of comfort. My parents doted on Lily, their love for her a balm to the wounds of the past. One day, while sipping coffee in my kitchen, I reflected on the journey I had taken. The pain, the struggle, the liberation, it had all led me to this moment of tranquility. I had not only survived, I had emerged stronger, more self-assured. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find David standing there, a look of defeat on his face. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." His apology, though late, was a validation of my decision. "Thank you, David," I said, not unkindly, "but it's too late. I've moved on." As I closed the door on David and the life we once shared, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that he had been a part of was over, and a new chapter was beginning. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, free to write my future as I saw fit. Lily's voice called out from the living room, bringing a smile to my face. I walked towards her, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead, a life full of possibilities and hope.
Hey, my name's Anna. My life's kind of been one for the books, and by that, I mean it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Quick, kind of painful, and mostly forgettable. If you've got a minute or two, pull up a chair. I've got a saga that'll make you thankful for your crazy relatives. Let's start with my so-called family picture. A quaint little house with a white picket fence, backyard BBQs, and a family dog named Buster who's missing a few patches of fur. That's where the Norman Rockwell painting ends. Inside that picture-perfect home was my big sister, Rachel, basically the queen bee. Then there's me. I guess I was like the worker bee, just buzzing around doing my thing, barely noticed. I've got to hand it to Rachel, though. She knew how to play the game. Blonde, a smile that could light up a dive bar, and a way with words that made our folks melt like a popsicle in July. She snagged everything growing up. A shiny new bike, the last slice of pizza, also Rachel's, the big fuzzy sweater I was eyeing for Christmas. You guessed it, Rachel's. And when she turned on the charm, it was game over. "Mom, Dad, can I please get that dress for prom?" She bat her eyes, and they fell for it every time. Me, though, I'd get the leftovers and the hand-me-downs. But don't get me wrong. I wasn't exactly Oliver Twist or anything. Got clothes on my back, a roof over my head, but let's just say life wasn't handing me any silver spoons. Now, my folks, Dad worked the kind of job where he came home with grease under his nails and a tired smile. Mom, she was a wizard with a spatula and a knack for sniffing out BS, unless it came from Rachel. When Rachel got into that fancy pants college with the big lawns and the ivy-covered walls, it was like Christmas came early and stayed late. Mom and Dad threw a party that could wake the dead. But by the time I was ready to start thinking about my own future, the parade had long passed. Suddenly, it was all money's tight, Anna, and real life's about making sacrifices. You know, I remember them breaking the news, sitting at the kitchen table that had a wobbly leg. Dad was scratching the back of his neck, a sure sign he wasn't keen on the conversation. "Anna, we've been crunching the numbers, and it's just not looking good," he said. "You've got to be realistic, Anna." Mom piped in, stirring her coffee, even though it didn't need any. "College ain't cheap. Maybe it's time you think about getting a job, help out a bit." The way they danced around it, you'd think they were telling me Buster ran off to join the circus, rather than just saying straight that my dreams were too expensive. So there I was, not even 18, and slapped with the reality that school was a no-go. I wasn't about to roll over and let dreams die, My plan was as plain as it could be. Work my fingers to the bone, save every penny, and get myself into that courtroom someday with S tagged to the end of my name. The jobs I had weren't glamorous by any stretch. By day, I was slinging coffee and dodging pastry crumbs. By night, I was up to my elbows in suds, washing dishes at a diner that had seen better days. "You've got to be the hardest working person I know, Anna," Emily said one night in our dingy little kitchen. She was a freelance graphic designer with a laugh that could light up the whole block. "Yeah," agreed, Trish chimed in, who was stringing her bass guitar, getting ready for a gig with her band. "If there's anyone who can pull this off, it's you." Their words were like a pat on the back, a cheer from the sidelines that kept my feet moving. Everything was on track, maybe a bit behind schedule, but what's life without a few delays, right? Then just like that, it all came crashing down. I woke up one morning with what I thought was a killer flu. Turns out it was way more serious. Long story short, I landed in the hospital with a stack of medical bills that looked like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Miss Anna, your insurance covered some of it, but the lady at the billing department had a voice that sounded like she was always about to deliver bad news, which she did. Big time. You still owe quite a bit, she said, pushing a bill across the desk that made my heart sink into my sneakers. There went my college fund, swallowed up by numbers and decimal points I could barely comprehend. I tried to plead my case, get a payment plan or something. Look, I got nothing, I told her, every part of me wanting to crawl into a hole and give up. It's not personal, Han. It's just the system, she replied. But it sure felt personal to me. Back at our apartment, the atmosphere was as stale as the pizza we left out overnight. There go the textbooks, I muttered, flipping through the pages of legal definitions I still hadn't memorized. We sat there, 3 dreams deferred, wrapped up in the brutal honesty of our cramped living space. What next? Trish asked after a silence that overstayed its welcome. I didn't have an answer, just a bunch of question marks dancing around my head. I was back to square one, but somehow it felt like I was even further behind than when I started. Start over, I finally said. What else can I do? I'm not cut out for giving up. It sounded good, but even I heard the quiver in my voice. Both of them nodded, but there was no hiding the worry lines etched deep into the moment. Yeah, I understand. Our house is too crowded, I whispered into the phone, the words bitter as they left my mouth. Mom didn't see me swallow the lump in my throat or the way my hand shook. You're tough, Anna. You'll figure it out. Dad offered up before he handed the phone back to Mom. The bus stop bench was hard against my back. I sat there figuring out my next move while people with places to be rushed past me. Rachel with her new baby and her picture-perfect life didn't even come to the phone, probably didn't want to catch my bad luck through the receiver. Family, right? The guy waiting next to me snorted, catching the tail end of my phone call. He was wearing a jacket that had seen better winters and a 5 o'clock shadow sitting at 8 o'clock. Yeah, family, I echoed, not really in the mood to chat. But there was a solace in talking to a stranger. Hey, don't let it beat you. You look like you've got fight in you, he said, crinkling the paper bag in his hand. I managed a half smile. Got any tips for sleeping on one of these seats? I joked, but the humor didn't quite reach my eyes. He looked over, squinting as if he was sizing up the bench. This is run all night. Ride him end to end, safer than a bench. His words hung in the air as my phone buzzed with a low battery warning. Great, add that to the list of today's hits. The bus hissed as it came to a stop in front of us, its doors yawning open, inviting us to go wherever it might take us. The guy got on the bus, finding a seat among the tired faces of nighttime commuters. I stayed back, bus fare tight in my fist, not ready to commit to just riding around in circles yet. I pulled my suitcase and started walking, the wheels drumming a lonely beat on the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered overhead, and in their stuttering light, I made a silent bow. This isn't how my story ends. Holding on to that thought, I walked through the night. Every step was a defiance, every breath a promise that I would claw my way out of this hole. Come on over, kid. Aunt Marlene's voice came through the other end like it was pulling me out of quicksand. I never thought I'd be so happy to hear that raspy tone of hers. When I got to her place, she didn't waste time on pleasantries or useless small talk. You look like hell, was her greeting as she ushered me in, her hand firm on my back. I spent the first few days in her guest room trying to piece myself back together. She didn't press me for details. She wasn't the type for cozy heart-to-hearts, but I could tell she was waiting for me to start talking. Finally, as we sat at her cluttered kitchen table flanked by plants that seemed as tough as she was, Aunt Marlene sat down her mug and looked at me with those piercing eyes. What do you want, Anna? Really want? It made me nervous, like I was on one of those makeover shows, and this was the big reveal. But I was too tired to beat around the bush. I want to be a lawyer, Aunt Marlene. My voice carried an edge of desperation I could no longer hide. She nodded as if she already knew it. If that's the case, she started, tapping her fingers on the table, the clinking sound mingling with the tick-tock of the wall clock. I'll pay for your education. My heart jolted like it got hit by a punch of hope. You serious as a heart attack? But she raised her finger, slicing the air with her condition. You keep your grades up, no slacking. Her words were stern, yet there was a spark in her eyes telling me she believed in me. Really? I couldn't help the grin that broke through. With the ocean, really? I didn't scream and sob just to blow my money on bingo and whiskey. I stood up and hugged her tight, the words "thank you" getting crushed between us. Now, none of that mushy stuff, she grumbled, but she patted my back before shooing me off. And you're going to work for me part-time. I need more help around here than I care to admit. What kind of work? I was eager, ready to do just about anything. The kind that needs doing, she replied vaguely, with a dismissive wave of her hand. We'll start with that jungle you call a hairdo and move on to the yard work tomorrow. I laughed. It was a hearty, genuine sound I hadn't heard from myself in a while. Deal? Don't think I'm just being nice. Aunt Marlene warned. You fall off, get lazy, and the deal's off. I shook my head, the seriousness settling back in. Won't happen. She eyed me for a long moment, then smiled. Good. Now help me with these damn plants. They've got a better social life than I do. I spent the rest of the day covered in soil, pruning and watering, but the dirt never felt so good on my hands. Aunt Marlene made me work for every penny she was offering, but that was okay. The college days weren't a walk in the park. Aunt Marlene hooked me up big time, but the balance between the books and bills was like juggling knives. Drop one and it could cut deep. I'd blink open in the mornings after cramming civil procedure, with my alarm buzzing like a bee in a jar. Books spread across the desk like a buffet I didn't want to dig into. When my stomach grumbled, reminding me I was a human who needed fuel, I'd make a run to the nearest food joint on campus. Regular Lily, who manned the counter, would ask with a knowing look as I approached, "Make it a double, long night ahead," I'd say. She'd pass over the coffee and sandwich. "You're going to burn out if you keep it like this," Lily would warn. Can't burn out when you're on fire, I'd quip, even though I felt more like kindling than a blaze. Nights turned into a blur of flashcards and frayed nerves. Whenever my phone buzzed, it was either a reminder for an unpaid bill or a message from Aunt Marlene asking how my day went. I always told her better than it actually was. Then things changed overnight. Aunt Marlene got real sick, life-taking sick. I squeezed her hand more times than I could count in that too-quiet hospital room. I couldn't say much. What do you say when the person who's your rock is crumbling? So who's going to yell at me for eating cookies in bed when you're gone? I tried to joke in one of those visits, struggling to keep it light. You better not, she rasped, voice a whisper, crumbs everywhere. We never talked about the money. It was like a silent agreement, the elephant in the room wearing a tutu nobody wanted to comment on. After she passed, I sat in that stiff lawyer's office, more nervous than I ever was for any exam. With a lawyer, a stiff man with a comb-over and glasses lighting down his nose said, "She's left you the house, Anna." It was like Aunt Marlene was still looking out for me. She what? I blinked, gears in my head grinding to a halt. The house, he fiddled with papers, a considerable amount for your student debts. The rest, well, it's for you to figure out. Marlene was clear about making your own way, despite the knot in my throat. I asked, did she say anything else? He adjusted his glasses. And that she believed in you, he continued, and that she'd haunt you if you gave up. I laughed through the tears. That was Aunt Marlene, all right. Leaving the office that day, I felt heavier and lighter at the same time. She gave me a legacy, not just in bricks and mortar, but in the belief that I could finish this last lap without her. I was neck deep in prep for the next big exam when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, the kind that tell you this ain't going to be a friendly how do you do. Pushing open the front door of Aunt Marlene's, my house. There they stood, Mom, Dad, Rachel, and her husband Dave, like some grim reunion. Rachel wasted no time. Anna, look at us all together again in this huge place. Like a twisted sitcom, ain't it? I drawled, leaning against the doorframe. Dad started in that tone, the kind that said, sit down, shut up. We decided, we've been talking, this house should be for Rachel. She's got kids, a family, he said. Incredulity played on my face. No kidding. Sarcasm heavy as an anchor. Wrong house for that chat. Then, Mom's lips tightened. A sure sign she was ramping up to a guilt trip. You'll understand when you have your own family. This is just practical. I must have missed the part where practical meant kicking me out of my own home. I shot back, crossing my arms. Rachel chimed in, batting her eyelashes at me, then eyeing Dave for support, who just shrugged. Sweetie, this house is wasted on you. We could give it life, laughter, children running around, and what? Turn on Marlene's parlor into a romper room? The idea felt like acid on my tongue. There's no need to be rude, Dave mumbled, finally finding words. Right, because showing up to claim my house is peak civility, I snapped. You're being selfish, Anna, Dad grunted, convinced of his own righteousness. My laughter was bitter. Selfish after years of keeping her in your thoughts during birthday cards. Convenient memory you got there. They shuffled, uneasy. This ain't how they imagined their gold digging would go. Rachel broke it predictably. You can be such a... Don't, I warned. Just leave, all of you, as they filed out the same door they came in, burdened by their disbelief and entitlement. Dad turned to me. You'll regret this. I stood tall, looking him square in the eye. The only thing I'll regret is not changing the lock sooner. The door shut behind them, and the silence was mine again. This unwelcome throwback was closed, inheritance or not. I was keeping Aunt Marlene's legacy, not auctioning it off to the highest bidder in my bloodline. I was beat, the kind of tired that sticks to your bones. Pulling into the driveway after a double shift at the law firm could do that to a person. All I wanted was a hot shower in my bed. As I jammed my key into the lock, it just ground against metal. What the... I muttered, fiddling with the key. That's when the door swung open. Rachel stood there, little Mia on her hip and a cocky tilt to her lips. Change the locks, Anna, surprise. My eyebrows shot up. Like hell you did. This is my house, she smirked. Not anymore, she said, bouncing Mia, who seemed blissfully unaware of the adult drama. Anger bubbled up hot and volatile. Watch me, I shot back, already dialing. Her smirk wavered. You're bluffing. With the dispatcher on the line, Rachel's confidence slipped another notch. Yes, my sisters illegally entered and changed the locks on my house. I explained loudly into the phone. Dad's truck pulled into the driveway just as I hung up. Him and Mom got out. Tag teaming like this was some sort of intervention. Anna, be reasonable, Mom started, her eyes moist, as if she were in a soap opera. I'm past reasonable, I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. Dave stepped up to me, a good foot taller, trying to look menacing. Come on, Anna, he said, voice low, don't make a scene. I held up my phone with the recording button clearly on. Say that again, Dave, for the camera, I insisted. His face turned the color of sour milk. Sirens cut through the heavy air as a cop car pulled into view. The officers stepped out, all stern looks and business. What seems to be the problem here? One officer asked. Their bravado crumbled like stale bread. Dad's voice lost a few decibels. It's a misunderstanding, officers. Family matter. Stealing my home's a bit more than a family matter, I said, crossing my arms. The officers looked between us, taking in the scene. They were good at this, shifting gears as the situation unfolded. All right, let's start with some ID, and we'll go from there, one of them said, pulling out a notepad. Reluctantly, Rachel handed Mia to Mom and dug into her purse. The legal tango had begun. They asked questions, we gave answers. Dad and Mom put on a show, but the deed to the house was in my name, signed and sealed by Aunt Marlene's will. Can you prove you live here, ma'am? The officer asked me. Better, I can prove I own it, I said, reaching for my briefcase in the car. The sight of Aunt Marlene's will felt like the first deep breath I'd taken since stepping out of that damn car. The officers read it, their eyebrows lifting and dipping as they took in the legalese. Seems clear to us, the officer said, folding the papers back into the briefcase. I suggest you hand over a set of keys to Miss here. Otherwise, we will have to proceed with charges for breaking and entering and unlawful eviction. Rachel gave up a set of keys. Mom and Dad hushed up quick, and Dave, well, he looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. The cops escorted them off the property. Mom shot me a look like I kicked her kitten. But the law was the law. No room for sob stories. The door closed behind me with a click, like the final word in an argument. I leaned against it, the rush of adrenaline making my hand shake. Exhausted, I sledged into the kitchen to make a much-needed cup of coffee as the kettle boiled. I thought about what my next move should be. The hefty click of the final lock snapping into place felt like the end of a long bad joke. My house, now a fortress, needed just one more thing to be perfect. Maybe I'll get a big nasty dog, I muttered to nobody in particular. I wasn't much of a pet person, but the thought of some drooling monster that could scare off any would-be family intrusions brought a smirk to my face. Weeks stripped by the silence from my family's end were louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. No calls, not even a lousy text. Sometimes, deep in the night when the work was done and the quiet was too much, I'd find myself on Rachel's social media page. She had a knack for the dramatic. Photos of the kids, all sad eyes and pouty lips, captions nipping at my conscience. Lil Timmy sure wishes he had a yard to play in. And Mia's third birthday without Auntie Anna, I chuckle every time. Does she think I had amnesia, that I forget why I stood my ground and take pity? I remember the days when I begged for money to pay for my studies, and all I got were fancy speeches about responsibility and tough love. I can still feel the cold slamming of the door when I was broke and covering, and they told me they had no room, the way my own bedrock, my foundation, crumbled to dust beneath me. Nah, my new life was my making, my dues paid in full, my battles fought with no one in my corner. No amount of puppy-eyed pictures would change the history they wished I forget. I thought about posting a reply once, something snappy and a bit mean, but why bother? I had work to catch up on a stack of files on my table that didn't give a damn about family feuds. I had clients who depended on me, and that was the reality I chose to engage with. Sometimes, late into the evening, I'd pour myself some bourbon neat and sit in my backyard, the backyard they wanted to take from me, and I'd savor the quiet. I'd think about that guard dog again, a big one with a bark that would make my folks think twice before stepping onto the porch. Maybe a Rottweiler or a Mastiff, something with bite. My phone stayed quiet, a dead limb I'd long since learned to function without. And when I'd finally hit the sack, I'd sleep the sleep of the just or the wicked. I didn't care which. No ghosts of guilt to disturb my rest. No restless wondering about what-ifs. Just the peace of knowing that from the four walls around me to the roof over my head, it was all mine, through and through. The last thing I remember every night was the faint idea of getting that dog. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, but the choice was mine. And that was good enough for me. You think you can just accuse me of cheating while I was away on business and demand a divorce? My husband Jackson bellowed through the phone. It should have been a jolting moment, but I knew better. This was just his attempt at stirring up drama. I already sold it, and you know what? I could practically feel his emotions quivering on the other end. Did he honestly believe I wouldn't see through his little charade? His naivety was almost comical as his accusations continued to ricochet off my resolve. I found myself teetering between anger and amusement. Yet amidst it all, a sense of empowerment began to emerge. This wasn't just a spat. This was a turning point. This was the moment I decided to take control. I chuckled inwardly at his feeble attempt to manipulate me. And then, as if the universe had aligned, a realization dawned on me. It was my turn to play. I'm Olivia, a 28-year-old working long hours. Though I held a steady job at a college store since I graduated from junior college at 20, Jackson's career trajectory has been less than stable. He's 2 years older, but when we first met 3 years ago, he was bouncing between jobs or sometimes doing nothing at all. He proposed to me hastily, but I set a condition. He needed to secure a stable job. I wasn't about to embark on a marriage without considering our future. Oh, okay, But there's a condition, I asserted firmly, watching Jackson's expression shift to one of concern. What is it? He asked cautiously. You need to find a stable job. Otherwise, marriage is out of the question. We need to think about our future. He attempted to brush it off with a casual remark. Oh, don't worry, you're working, so there's no rush, right? But my parents would be concerned if I married without a job. I'll find one before we tie the knot, he promised, sensing the seriousness in my tone. Reluctantly, Jackson embarked on his job search journey. Eventually, he secured an office position at a construction company, and we moved forward with our plans to wed. At the time, I saw Jackson as somewhat careless with money and work, but I believed our partnership could balance each other out. I thought I could guide him towards financial responsibility, and he would complement my strength. Little did I know, our challenges were just beginning. About a year into our marriage, as we were exploring the idea of buying a house, Jackson revealed a troubling obstacle. I might not qualify for a loan, he confessed casually. I was taken aback. What do you mean? I pressed for an explanation. Because I haven't been at my job long enough, I might need a guarantor for the loan. The only option would be my dad, but he's dealing with some serious gambling debts. He probably wouldn't be able to help. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? I was dumbfounded, especially with the contract and the real estate agent right in front of us. But Jackson, appearing unfazed, nonchalantly remarked, If we put the house in your name, it'll be fine, right? You've been at your job forever, so you can secure the loan. We'll both contribute to paying it off. It's just a formality. That's beside the point. Why didn't you bring this up before? This is significant for me too. I'm not even prepared with the paperwork. I retorted, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Though he offered an apology, his contrition felt superficial, lacking sincerity. Despite my urge to protest further, faced with the already arranged contract and the presence of the agent, I decided against escalating the situation. Reluctantly, I hastily gathered the necessary documents, such as my income statement, for the loan application and impulsively finalized the purchase under my name. Doubt gnawed at me. Could I truly envision a future with this man? Perhaps. I should have simply asserted, then we won't proceed, instead of hastily preparing the paperwork. My anxiety heightened with the looming issue of my in-laws. The other day, I had a conversation with Dad. Jackson began. He mentioned he might lose the house due to the debt I mentioned earlier, so he's considering moving in with us. Is that all right? What? Why would you even entertain that idea? I reacted swiftly, but Jackson merely shrugged it off. Well, he's facing difficulties. My brother is single, but he's working abroad. I'm the only one Dad can turn to. Should we seriously discuss this? Maybe he can stay temporarily until he finds a place. But committing to living with us permanently is a major decision, Jackson scowled. You just don't want him to stay because, to you, if he moves in, we can divide the living expenses. You're always going on about money, I countered. You mean the money you never contribute? You promised we'd split the mortgage, but it's only coming out of my paycheck. You haven't given your share. In marriage, finances are shared. It's not just your money, it's ours. It's deducted from your account because the house is in your name. Stop being so self-centered, I explained, frustration evident in my tone. But Jackson simply muttered, I hate discussing money, before storming out of the room. Such disputes became a regular occurrence. Every time Jackson would brush off my concerns and eventually retreat. No resolution was ever reached. However, Jackson wasn't entirely inactive regarding his family's predicament. As part of his role in construction site administration, he frequently dealt with real estate contracts. He often consulted a specific agency on how to secure the best price for selling his family's home and the necessary procedures involved. I overheard these discussions repeatedly, finding solace in the fact that I wasn't alone in contemplating this matter. Yet the prospect of my in-laws moving in with us post-sale, as if it were a foregone conclusion, continued to unsettle me. Jackson began attending meetings with real estate agents and my in-laws without involving me, and he started spending more weekends away from home. Eventually, He embarked on a lengthy business trip lasting several months, necessitated by the distance of the construction site he was overseeing. It wasn't apparent to me then, but the seeds of our power struggle had already been sown. A few days after Jackson departed for his trip, I decided to treat myself to tea after a shopping excursion. Hello, the man who greeted me seemed familiar, memories flooding back, recalling him as someone Jackson had once brought home. He worked at a real estate company, a young employee named Samuel. According to Jackson, Samuel had been with the company for less than a year. Ah, yes, I remember you. You visited our house before, right? I said. Yes, I apologize for dropping by unannounced and even joining for a meal. My apologies, Samuel replied. No need to worry. I should have been more welcoming, I said. We ended up sharing tea together. Samuel was affable and appeared more level-headed than Jackson, despite his youth. As we conversed over tea, we found common ground and eventually bid each other farewell. At that moment, I couldn't fathom that this brief encounter would later be twisted into an accusation of infidelity. Yet, that's precisely what happened when Jackson confronted me. You've been cheating on me while I was away, haven't you? We're getting a divorce. Give the house to my parents and leave immediately. Jackson's accusation hit me like a sledgehammer. In that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if the rumors were true. Jackson had evidently been spreading falsehoods, fabricating a narrative of my infidelity to justify his desire for divorce. And the bearer of this false tale was none other than Samuel, the man Jackson unjustly accused me of having an affair with. He showed up at my doorstep the day after our tea. I apologized for the sudden visit yesterday. Jackson asked me to reach out to you, Samuel confessed as he stood at my doorway. Shock and confusion washed over me, but I invited him inside, eager to hear his story. What he revealed left me stunned. Jackson had orchestrated a plan to frame me for infidelity, all in a bid to secure a divorce. Samuel was roped into fabricating evidence to support the scheme. There were two motives driving Jackson's deceitful agenda. Firstly, he coveted our house. Fearing the potential loss of his parents-in-law's property, Jackson saw cohabiting with his parents as the easiest solution. But my resistance to the idea led him to devise a plan to oust me and claim the property. Secondly, Jackson was involved in an affair of his own, spending weekends with his mistress while pretending to discuss matters with my parents-in-law. His infatuation with her led him to view me, his wife, as an impediment. By framing me for infidelity, he hoped to secure both the house and compensation in the divorce settlement. Despite my perception of Jackson's lack of astuteness, his cunning nature in orchestrating such a devious plan was truly despicable. As I muttered my disdain, Samuel offered his apologies. However, I had no intention of aiding Jackson in his malicious scheme. I feigned cooperation, all the while plotting to turn the tables on him. Samuel, leveraging his expertise in real estate, offered various suggestions. Eventually, he proposed a daring move. You should sell the house while Jackson is away on his trip. And so, when Jackson returned, bewildered by the news of the sale, I delivered the final blow. I know everything, Jackson. Samuel recorded everything, including your attempt to frame me for cheating with him. If we proceed with divorce, I can claim alimony and take you to court, I declared, relishing the shock that registered on Jackson's face. Why? He stammered. But I wasn't finished. I had one last card to play. You might not have realized, but Samuel isn't just any new employee. He's the son of the company's CEO. I emphasized, incredulous at Jackson's obliviousness. Didn't you notice? Samuel shares the same last name as the CEO. How did that escape your notice? I pressed, my frustration mounting. Well, Samuel's last name isn't exactly uncommon. Jackson attempted to rationalize. Are you serious right now? I couldn't believe his lack of awareness. Yes, I'm serious, Jackson replied, his shock palpable. The realization dawned on him slowly. Samuel's company was one of Jackson's most crucial clients, and they had played a significant role in handling his family's property matters. If news of this deceit reached the CEO, Jackson would undoubtedly find himself in hot water. In fact, Samuel had likely already reported the situation. "Look, fine, I'll check it out. But if you're lying, I'll figure it out." Jackson relented before abruptly ending the call. It didn't take long for him to realize the gravity of his actions. Subsequently, the real estate company owned by Samuel's father refused to engage in any business dealings with Jackson or offer him advice regarding his family property. With my house sold, Jackson had no option but to return to his family home following his business trip. Fortunately, Samuel had assisted me in finding an affordable apartment, so I encountered no difficulties as I initiated the divorce proceedings. Jackson persisted in reaching out to me. "I'm sorry, Olivia. Please forgive me," he pleaded. "It's too late for apologies now. You tried to manipulate me using someone else. Why should I believe anything you say?" I countered, "Don't say that. After our divorce, you can be with that other woman, right? That's what you wanted, isn't it?" he suggested, attempting to deflect blame. "Yeah, she had someone else she liked and dumped me. What a sorry tale. But just because of that, don't expect me to change my mind and come running back to you," I muttered as I ended the call with a heavy sigh. Despite not disclosing my current address to him in hopes of keeping him at bay, Jackson's incessant calls persisted. Each time he pleaded, "Please don't leave me. I'll change. I'll be a better husband." Yet I was weary of his hollow promises. "Once the divorce is finalized, I'll delete his number, block him on WhatsApp, and sever ties completely." To make matters worse, even my mother-in-law reached out, begging, "Please, Olivia, we'll be lost without you. It's not me you wanted, it's the house, right?" "But there's no house left," I reminded her. "It wasn't just about the house. We're not that heartless. Come back, and you'll understand," she implored. "You wanted the money, didn't you?" I shot back, frustration seeping into my voice. "That's not true. You're being unfair. She attempted to coerce me into living with you. And when I refused, Jackson resorted to deceit to gain leverage in the divorce." "I can't trust someone who resorts to such tactics," I asserted firmly. "It's obvious you're only interested in money." I continued to rebuff their pleas. Then my father-in-law called, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Isn't it your duty as a daughter-in-law to assist my wife a little? Are you seriously refusing? Isn't all of this a consequence of the debts you've accumulated?" I countered, my resolve unwavering. In response, his voice on the phone grew so loud that it hurt my ears. "You heartless woman, abandoning your mother-in-law in her time of need and shifting blame onto her. I'll teach you a lesson, you wicked woman." With that, I ended the call, shaken but determined. Armed with the recorded audio, I sought counsel from my lawyer. As it transpired, my father-in-law's words constituted a threat. Armed with this evidence, I informed Jackson that I'd pursue legal action if he didn't agree to the divorce. In a panic, Jackson reluctantly consented to the divorce. Finally, I was free from the clutches of that outrageous family. After the divorce, Jackson's reputation at work suffered, leading to a loss of trust and diminished responsibilities. Additionally, the unresolved debt forced him to sell his family home at a steep discount. Now he resides in a modest apartment with his parents, grappling with a reduced salary and the burden of supporting his family. To compound his challenges, he is obligated to pay me alimony. Learning about Jackson's struggles firsthand from Samuel, who remained a confidant, I discovered an opportunity to leverage my customer service skills from my previous role at a clothing store. Samuel, now working in the HR department of a real estate company, recommended me for a position that required strong communication abilities. After careful consideration and discussions with Samuel, I accepted the offer and transitioned to the real estate company. Throughout this transition, Samuel and I maintained our close bond, which eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. After a year of dating, we tied the knot, and I became the spouse of the future company president. Jackson likely never envisioned that the two individuals he attempted to falsely accuse of infidelity would ultimately find love and marry each other. Now, surrounded by my supportive new family, including my in-laws, I look forward to building a beautiful life together with Samuel. I filed for divorce. A poor wife is useless after all. My husband suddenly shocked me with these words. Moreover, while I was away on a business trip, not only did he file for divorce, but he also married his lover. Furthermore, my husband said, "You, a poor person, married me for my wealth, right? I won't fall for that, so give up any claim to the property." As if I married him for his money. When I confronted my indifferent husband, who had always treated me like a poor person and scorned me since our marriage, he started to unravel. Ultimately, he spiraled down to rock bottom. My name is Karen, 35 years old. My father passed away when I was in kindergarten, and since then, my mother raised me and my sister by herself. I was grateful to my mother, but deep down, I always wished I had a father. Of course, I didn't necessarily want a new father, but I always dreamed of living happily ever after with my husband, surrounded by children, though I didn't know how many we have. Life on just my mother's earnings was far from wealthy, but we were happy as a family of 3. However, the poverty I grew up with never left me, even after I started working and earning a decent salary. Even when I was single, my grocery shopping at the supermarket centered around discounted items, and I would stock up during sales if the items wouldn't go bad. Eating out was out of the question, and for meals alone, I wouldn't even buy convenience store bento. For drinks, I would bring tea in a thermos. Before I knew it, saving money had become like a hobby of mine. I married my husband John 4 years ago. We met through an acquaintance and hit it off. Unlike me, who grew up poor, John was wealthy from a young age, and our views on money and values were completely different. However, I was drawn to his kindness and the new world he showed me. We started dating soon after meeting, and as I was over 30 and eager to get married, we tied the knot in less than a year. We decided to move into my apartment, which was close to both our places. It was a company-subsidized apartment, so the rent was quite cheap. One of the reasons we chose it as our new home. After marriage, I continued paying the rent, and John contributed to other living expenses. This was how our married life began. John had a somewhat traditional view of gender roles, believing women should quit their jobs and take care of the home after marriage, and that men should support women while women managed the household. I found these views of his cool and masculine at the time. Before our marriage, he suggested I become a homemaker, saying he would support me. He probably thought of me as a domestic woman, good at cooking and cleaning, which made me happy at that moment. However, I loved my job and had important responsibilities at work. I didn't hate household chores, but being a full-time homemaker wasn't an option for me. If I quit my job and became a homemaker, we would have to leave this apartment as its company subsidized. Moving to a similar apartment would significantly increase our rent and moving costs. Honestly, John's salary wasn't that high. If we had children, our financial needs would increase, and I would inevitably need to keep working. Thinking about our situation, I decided to earn as much as I could while I could. And since I was paying the rent, I felt I needed to continue earning. I subtly brought up these points, including the need to move out of the apartment, in a conversation with my husband John. This was probably the first time I contradicted his opinions. "Hey, about you wanting me to be a homemaker. I'll take care of the house, but can I continue working until we have kids? I want to save as much money as we can for now." "Huh? Are you saying my salary isn't enough? Or do you just want more money to spend?" "It's not like that. Kids are expensive, and I want to save up for that. I can even use my earnings for our living expenses. It's better to have more money, right?" "Right. Your annual income is $115,000, right?" "It's not much, just enough for the rent, but it's better than nothing. It's better than lounging around at home." "All right, but don't slack off on the housework." $115,000? "Yeah, but thank you. I'll keep working until we have kids, of course. I'll take care of the house too." Though I felt uneasy about some parts, I managed to convince him to let me keep working. But in hindsight, this might have upset him. Balancing work and household chores was harder than I expected. My days were incredibly busy. I was a full-time employee, not part-time. I woke up early to prepare breakfast, lunch boxes for both of us, and to do some prep for dinner and tidy up the house. When I got home, I prepared dinner, heated the bath, and did laundry after John went to sleep. Honestly, there was barely any time for us as a couple, and I began to wonder if this was really what a marriage should be like. On the other hand, John, who acted like a traditional husband, did absolutely nothing at home. He must have seen how busy I was with household chores, but he would just eat dinner, drink beer, and relax when he got home. He'd bathe alone as soon as it was ready, then go to his room. I wished he would help out a bit, given how hard I was working, but I couldn't say anything, fearing he'd tell me to just quit my job. Despite his lack of help at home, I naively hoped he would change once we had kids. However, our relationship had grown distant, making the prospect of having children unlikely. I decided to discuss it with John. Hey, we should start thinking about having kids, right? Hub, kids, you're quite energetic considering you're tired from work and chores. It's not about that. I want to have children. We haven't been married that long. Isn't it too early for kids? Maybe for you, but I'm already over 30. Women have a limited time to have children. It's getting harder to conceive as I get older. It's almost too late. Then we don't need kids. If we have one, you'll expect me to help, right? You know I'm busy with work. I won't help with child rearing. What? Declaring you won't help with child rearing even before they're born is strange, isn't it? I plan to raise them alone, but shouldn't you at least have the intention to help? It's your child too. Child rearing is your job. I'm working to support the family, so I definitely won't help with the kids. You'll just complain that I don't help and that you're doing it alone, making me the bad guy. You must have been indoctrinated with a poverty and lots of kids since birth. We're not poor. We don't need kids. End of discussion. John abruptly ended the conversation and went to his room. Standing alone in the living room, I was overwhelmed by tears. Not only was my wish for children rejected, but also my upbringing was mocked. Following this incident, our relationship deteriorated rapidly, and we hardly spoke anymore. There were no children and barely any communication. Maybe it was time to consider divorce. Yet a faint image of my once kind husband lingered in my mind, making me wish we could return to the happy couple we used to be. Since then, I tirelessly juggled work and home responsibilities. I was incredibly busy with various tasks. Eventually, I took on a significant project at work, which meant more business trips and further distance from John. One day, as usual, I told him about an upcoming business trip, but his reaction was unlike any other time. I'll be away on a business trip for about 10 days from tomorrow. Please take care. Another trip. You're always working hard. Take care, even though you must be tired. He unexpectedly said, unlike his usual mocking self. He even said with a smile, wait for a big surprise when you get back. I had given up on him and was resolved to a decision internally. However, his smile shook my resolve. Our wedding anniversary was approaching, and I thought maybe he had a surprise for that. Despite everything, I hoped he might have changed his heart. I even considered rethinking my stance if he had truly changed. However, my faint hope was shattered by a major incident when I returned home 10 days later. I faced the first surprise. The front door wouldn't open. The key didn't fit. As I struggled, John spoke from inside. Karen, right? Surprised? This is the first surprise. I changed the locks, so your key won't work anymore. What do you mean? Why doesn't my key work? Open the door. Why would I let a stranger into my house? I changed the locks. And for your information, we're divorced. That's the second surprise. A poor wife is useless. Divorce? I never signed any papers. How could you even do this? I just forged your signature. I submitted it with a friend's name as a witness. So, you're a stranger now. Got it? Now understood. Then we need to discuss property division, right? Right, property division. I have a document for you to sign, waiving your rights to property division. I thought you'd say, give me property division if you want a divorce. Poor people like you probably saw me as rich. You married me for my wealth, right? I won't fall for that. So, waive your rights to the property. What? I never even thought about property division. I hadn't even considered divorce. So, you'll also waive your rights to property division, right? How much property do you think a poor person like you has? A few thousand in savings at most. I don't need that. I have more assets. So, if anyone is doing the dividing, it would be me giving money to you, not the other way around. Don't you get it? Is that so? Well, that doesn't matter. Let's change the document to reflect mutual renunciation of property rights and make it a public document. I retorted stubbornly. Afterward, John redid the document on his computer, deciding to make it a public document. However, it would be some time before we could submit it. I decided to pack my things and leave the house for the moment. As I was leaving, he scorned me until the end. You are poor. I thought about throwing away your belongings while you were on your trip, but you barely had anything, always wearing the same clothes typical of the poor. The reason my belongings were few at that time was deliberate, part of my plan. The only unexpected thing was John changing the locks without my knowledge. A few days later, as expected, a panicked John called. Karen, what have you done? What do you mean? I haven't done anything. Why are you panicking? I have a lot of questions. First, I was told to leave the apartment. Oh, you were still living there. That's not allowed. It's a new month. You're trespassing. Trespassing? But it's my house. Are you okay? Did you forget that was a company apartment I rented? I was the leaseholder, so naturally, you can't live there anymore. That's ridiculous. How could you do this? I can't believe you didn't know. I'm not the one who should be accused of doing things on my own. Didn't I tell you that you can't just change the locks of a rental apartment? It's my house. I can change the locks if I want. Didn't you listen? It was my lease apartment. Even if you were the leaseholder, the owner is the apartment manager. You can't change the locks without informing them. Is that so? Also, I terminated the lease. While you changed the locks, I was allowed to live there until this month. I was planning to return, but now you've unlawfully altered someone else's property, which could be criminal damage. Wait, why did you terminate it so early? Criminal damage? Is that why the police are at the front door now? I'm too scared to open it. But I calmly replied, so the police did come. Don't worry, it's probably not for trespassing or criminal damage. It's better to talk to them. Why do I know about the police? Because I reported you for filing the divorce papers yourself. It seems like you've committed crimes like forgery and fraudulent use of a private document. Divorce papers can be filed by one person, but only with mutual agreement and personal signatures. Since John forged my signature and the witness, it's obvious that it's a crime. But he seemed unaware of his guilt. I continued pressing further. So the divorce papers you submitted are invalid, and your marriage with Susan can't happen either. How do you know about Susan? Did you think I knew nothing? I had a private detective agency thoroughly investigate your affair with Susan. It was a busy time at work, and coordinating with the agency was tough. Plus, you even held a grand wedding ceremony while I was supposedly on a business trip. Are you okay? Your business trip was a lie. Yes, I took leave from work despite being busy to do some research and prepare documents. I knew about you bringing Susan home. It would have been impossible to gather this evidence while working. After I revealed everything, John was speechless and seemed quite downcast, even over the phone. Then he pleaded with me, "Please don't tell Susan. I'm divorced." Why would I? There's no such fact to tell. Really? Thank you. Are you misunderstanding something? When did you become divorced? That fake divorce paper is invalid, remember? So legally, you're still my husband, not divorced. What? So since you committed adultery, well, legally, my husband, Susan needs to pay compensation. I sent the demand for reparation to her house yesterday by express delivery. She didn't know you were married, right? Then I can't withdraw the claim at this point. I already knew Susan believed John was single, but I deliberately sent the reparation demand. Susan hasn't contacted me yet. So maybe she hasn't received the letter. It should arrive soon. Shouldn't you be on the phone with me when you also have to deal with the police? You're busy. I'll ignore the police. I won't be arrested. I'm going to Susan's house now to get the letter back before she or her family can accept it. He then hung up. He probably went straight to Susan's house to wait for the postman at the front door. I knew it would be futile because the letter was sent as registered mail to Susan only. A few hours later, a dispirited John called me. According to him, there was an incident when the postman arrived. Finally, I'll take that envelope. Who are you? You don't live here, right? I'm practically a resident here since I'm married. I have the right to receive the mail. I see, but I can't give you this envelope. It's registered mail for Susan only. What? Get it to me. Absolutely not. If you're so eager, ask Susan for permission. What's going on here? Oh, John, what's all this noise? What's happening? Ah, Susan, this is registered mail for you. This man insisted on taking it. Sorry for the disturbance. Now, I'll be on my way. What's this? A demand for reparation? John, you were married. What's going on here? Sorry, it's just, she's an ex-wife from a long time ago. I was embarrassed to say I'm divorced. I'm sorry for keeping it secret, but it's strange, isn't it? We haven't been dating long, and a demand for reparation? If you were divorced before we started dating, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, my ex-wife is crazy. Maybe she's demanding reparation out of spite because I got married. That was the excuse he gave, but such a lie was quickly exposed. The envelope included a letter. I wrote along with my contact information, so Susan called me directly. In that call, I told her about the affair, the invalid divorce, and that they had a wedding ceremony while he was still married to me. Although they had a wedding ceremony, they hadn't submitted the marriage registration yet. John wanted to submit it on You Good Coos Day, so it was still pending. He probably delayed submitting the marriage registration due to uncertainty about whether the divorce was finalized. After being exposed, Jan fled from Susan's house and shamelessly contacted me again. I still had something to tell him, so we agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. As soon as I arrived, John said, "Karen, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's pretend we've been separated for a long time and officially divorced. Now I can apologize to Susan for being secretly divorced and maybe cover it up. You think I'm desperate to stay married to you. I was going to file for divorce anyway, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation. Just trying to extort money from me, huh? Typical of the poor, you have such a poor heart. You're talking nonsense. Depending on my answer, everything can change. There's still an option where we don't divorce. If I say no, you can't reject it, meaning you can't marry Susan and your marital status will be exposed. Fine, I'll pay the reparation. Just divorce me now. Sign here. Then about property division. Property division? How much more do you want to take from me? Reparation should be enough. Remember, we agreed to waive property division, right? So let's make it official. All right, you're not as bad as I thought. Thank you. We then went to a public notary, made a public document for reparation and property division, and then to the city hall to submit the divorce papers, finalizing our divorce. Relieved, I exchanged final words with John. Glad we don't have to divide property. What are you saying? I'm the one who benefits from that. By the way, do you even have assets? After paying me reparation, Susan will also claim damages. She mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. That's impossible. I'm marrying Susan. She can't claim that. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. Still living in a fantasy. You committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still married. You think Susan still believes you. A marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Susan will believe me. Believe that if you want. I heard from Susan directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them. You knew about that. I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken property division and been better off. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided property, you would have benefited more. What are you talking about, poor woman? Your family is poor, and you only make $15,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it would be barely $20,000. You don't have any property. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary is indeed $15,000. But you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no interest in me, but I became a director of the American branch. It's not $115,000 per year, but per month, $155,000 per month. So that's an annual income of $1,860,000. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $180,000 a year. $180,000? That can't be true. Of course, I haven't had the chance to spend such an amount, so I've been saving it for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. So, I could have received half of that in the property division. You were my destiny after all. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay? After all the contempt, you think I'd gladly undo the divorce. If you have that much money, you don't need to claim reparation, right? It's just a small amount for you. He who laughs at 1 cent will weep for 1 cent. This reparation is for the mental anguish you caused me. I'd like to claim more, honestly. And since we've made it official, make sure to pay it, even in installments. I'll be penniless. Also, don't go back to that apartment. Your belongings should have been moved to your parents' house by now. You thought I had few belongings, but that was because I had already moved. Most of them were you that indifferent to me? I can't have so little, so I have to go back to my parents' house. They don't know anything yet. Do they? Let me explain. Don't say anything. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said, don't ever step over our threshold again, so I have nowhere to go. He collapsed, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused trouble at the police station. Despite my advice, he went back to the apartment. He sat there aimlessly in the empty apartment until the manager called the police, and he was taken away. I'm not sure if it was for obstructing public duties, trespassing, or for the falsified divorce papers. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him after talking with me and learning about Susan. They decided that apologizing and paying damages to Susan's family came first. They went to Susan's house to apologize, kneeling in front of her family. They settled everything without pressing charges for marriage fraud, even paying for the wedding expenses. I had expected them to sue, so it was disappointing they didn't. So I decided to pursue legal action against him for forging the divorce papers. John offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't want him to think everything could be solved with money. I wanted him to be convicted and understand the gravity of his actions. Even if it cost time and money, I left everything to my lawyer, so it wasn't too burdensome for me. Even though it took time, Jen exposed for his actions, and the marriage fraud at his company couldn't stay there anymore. After being detained by the police and subsequently absent without leave, he was eventually fired. He ended up living at his parents' home, working all day at a relative's construction company. His father took all his earnings, leaving him with no income. I thought his parents wouldn't abandon him, but they were stricter than I expected. They paid my reparation and Susan's compensation, planning to make him work like a horse until he repaid everything. He lived in a shed-like place with no electricity, receiving only $5 per day for food, deducted from his salary. They planned to disown and kick him out once he's repaid everything, a harsh fate after years of hard work. I was offered a position at the head office abroad, so I moved overseas after the divorce was finalized. I worried John might come to me for help or harbor resentment, but the move abroad alleviated those concerns. I thought work would be my partner for a while, but soon I found a new relationship. I'm now dating a foreign executive at our head office, and I'm pregnant with plans to marry soon. I told him everything about my past and my ex-husband, and he's understanding. I'll take maternity leave and plan to return to work later, supported by him. He's enthusiastic about taking paternity leave and co-parenting, showing a different cultural perspective. After being tormented by my ex-husband, I finally feel I'm grasping true happiness and confidence in building the happy family I always dreamed of. Many suffer due to selfish spouses. While divorce isn't always the right choice, enduring silence isn't a virtue. It's important to know that honest discussions can lead to resolutions, and sometimes divorce is a necessary option. I initiated the divorce, deeming a financially struggling spouse to be of little value. My world was shaken when, during a business trip, my husband abruptly declared not only his intent to divorce, but also his simultaneous marriage to his lover. To add insult to injury, he accused me of marrying him solely for his wealth and demanded I forfeit any claims to our property. Confronting my indifferent husband, who had always treated me with disdain since our marriage, led to his unraveling and a downward spiral to rock bottom. I am Karen, 35 years old, raised by a single mother since my father's passing in kindergarten. Despite the financial challenges, we found happiness as a family of 3. Even as an adult with a decent salary, my frugal habits persisted from childhood. I married John, a wealthy man I met through an acquaintance, drawn to his kindness and the new world he presented. Our differing views on money and gender roles emerged after marriage. While John envisioned a traditional household, I was dedicated to my career and financial independence. Before marriage, John suggested I become a homemaker, assuming I would embrace traditional domestic roles. However, I expressed my desire to continue working until we had children, emphasizing the financial benefits. Although I managed to convince him, the reality of balancing work and household chores proved challenging. Despite being a full-time employee, my days were consumed with domestic responsibilities, leaving little time for us as a couple. In contrast, John, adopting a traditional husband role, contributed nothing to household tasks. While he witnessed my busy schedule, he simply indulged in dinner and relaxation. Upon returning home, balancing work and domestic responsibilities took a toll on our relationship, prompting me to question if this was the essence of a marriage. Despite my efforts, I hesitated to voice my dissatisfaction, fearing he might insist I quit my job. Despite his lack of contribution at home, I had hoped that the arrival of children would bring about a positive change in our relationship. Unfortunately, our connection had grown distant, casting doubt on the possibility of expanding our family. Feeling the urgency to discuss this matter, I approached John. "Hey, we should start considering having kids, right?" I said. "Huh, kids? You're quite energetic, considering you're tired from work and chores," he replied. "It's not about that. I want to have children. We haven't been married that long, but I'm already over 30. Women have a limited time to have children, and it's getting harder for me to conceive as I get older. It's almost too late. But we don't need kids. If we have one, you'll expect me to help, right? You know I'm busy with work, and I won't help with child rearing." Declaring you won't help with child rearing even before they're born is strange, isn't it? I plan to raise them alone, but shouldn't you at least have the intention to help? It's your child too. Child rearing is your job. I'm working to support the family, so I definitely won't help with the kids. You'll just complain that I don't help, making me the bad guy. You must have been indoctrinated with poverty and lots of kids since birth. We're not poor. We don't need kids. End of discussion. John abruptly ended the conversation, retreating to his room alone in the living room. Tears overwhelmed me. My desire for children was not only rejected, but my upbringing was also mocked. Following this incident, our relationship deteriorated rapidly, communication became scarce, and the possibility of having children seemed more distant. As I continued to juggle work and home responsibilities, taking on significant projects at work, I found myself increasingly distant from John. One day, when informing him about an upcoming business trip, his unexpected kindness surprised me. He wished me well and hinted at a big surprise upon my return. Despite having given up on him, his smile shook my resolve. However, my faint hope was shattered upon returning home. The front door wouldn't open, and John revealed the first surprise. He had changed the locks. The second surprise was the announcement of our divorce. He claimed to have forged my signature and submitted the papers with a friend as a witness. Inside, he presented a document for me to sign, waiving my rights to property division. Protesting the false accusations, I insisted on a mutual renunciation of property rights, intending to make it a public document. John stubbornly retorted, redoing the document on his computer, initiating a tense exchange. As I left the house, he continued to scorn me for being poor, even contemplating discarding my belongings. A few days later, John, in a state of panic, called me. "What do you mean? I haven't done anything. Why are you panicking?" I asked. I have a lot of questions. First, I was told to leave the apartment. "Oh, you were still living there? That's not allowed. It's a new month. You're trespassing." "Trespassing? But it's my house." "Are you okay? Did you forget that it was a company apartment I rented? I was the leaseholder, so naturally, you can't live there anymore." "That's ridiculous. How could you do this? I can't believe you didn't know." "I'm not the one who should be accused of doing things on my own. Didn't I tell you that you can't just change the locks of a rental apartment? It's my house. I can change the locks if I want. Didn't you listen? It was my leased apartment. Even if you were the leaseholder, the owner is the apartment manager. You can't change the locks without informing them." "Is that so? Also, I terminated the lease. While you changed the locks, I was allowed to live there until this month. I was planning to return, but now you've unlawfully altered someone else's property, which could be criminal damage." "Wait, why did you terminate it so early? Criminal damage? Is that why the police are at the front door now?" "I'm too scared to open it," he confessed. "Don't worry. It's probably not for trespassing or criminal damage. It's better to talk to them." "Why do I know about the police?" "Because I reported you for filing the divorce papers yourself. It seems like you've committed crimes like forgery and fraudulent use of a private document. Divorce papers can be filed by one person, but only with mutual agreement and personal signatures. Since John forged my signature and the witness, it's obvious that it's a crime." But he seemed unaware of his guilt. I continued pressing further. "So the divorce papers you submitted are invalid, and your marriage with Susan can't happen either." "How do you know about Susan? Did you think I knew nothing? I had a private detective agency thoroughly investigate your affair with Susan. It was a busy time at work, and coordinating with the agency was tough. Plus, you even held a grand wedding ceremony while I was supposedly on a business trip. Are you okay? Your business trip was a lie." "Yes, I took leave from work despite being busy to do some research and prepare documents. I knew about you bringing Susan home. It would have been impossible to gather this evidence while working." After I revealed everything, John was speechless and seemed quite downcast, even over the phone. Then he pleaded with me, "Please don't tell Susan I'm divorced." "Why would I? There's no such fact to tell." "Really? Thank you. Are you misunderstanding something? When did you become divorced? That fake divorce paper is invalid, remember? So legally, you're still my husband, not divorced." "What? So, since you committed adultery, well, legally my husband, Susan needs to pay compensation. I sent the demand for reparation to her house yesterday by express delivery. She didn't know you were married, right? Then I can't withdraw the claim at this point. I already knew Susan believed John was single, but I deliberately sent the reparation demand. Susan hasn't contacted me yet, so maybe she hasn't received the letter. It should arrive soon. Should you be on the phone with me when you also have to deal with the police? You're busy. I'll ignore the police. I won't be arrested. I'm going to Susan's house now to get the letter back before she or her family can accept it." Then he hung up. He probably went straight to Susan's house to wait for the postman at the front door. I knew it would be futile because the letter was sent as registered mail to Susan only. Even if he waited for the postman, he couldn't receive it. A few hours later, a dispirited John called me. According to him, there was an incident when the postman arrived. Finally, I'll take that envelope. Who are you? You don't live here, right? I'm practically a resident here since I'm married. I have the right to receive the mail. I see, but I can't give you this envelope. It's registered mail for Susan only. What? Give it to me. Absolutely not. If you're so eager, ask Susan for permission. What's going on here? Oh, John, what's all this noise? What's happening? Ah, Susan, this is registered mail for you. This man insisted on taking it. Sorry for the disturbance. Now, I'll be on my way. What's this? A demand for reparation? John, you were married. What's going on here? Sorry, it's just. She's an ex-wife from a long time ago. I was embarrassed to say I'm divorced. I'm sorry for keeping it secret. But it's strange, isn't it? We haven't been dating long, and a demand for reparation? If you were divorced before we started dating, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, my ex-wife is crazy. Maybe she's demanding reparation out of spite because I got married. That was the excuse he gave, but such a lie was quickly exposed. The envelope included a letter I wrote, along with my contact information, so Susan called me directly. In that call, I told her about the affair, the invalid divorce, and that they had a wedding ceremony while he was still married to me. Although they had a wedding ceremony, they hadn't submitted the marriage registration yet. John wanted to submit it on April Fool's Day, so it was still pending. He probably delayed submitting the marriage registration due to uncertainty about whether the divorce was finalized. After being exposed, John fled from Susan's house and shamelessly contacted me again. I still had something to tell him, so we'd agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. As soon as I arrived, John said, "Karen, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's pretend we've been separated for a long time and officially divorced. Now, I can apologize to Susan for being secretly divorced and maybe cover it up. You think I'm desperate to stay married to you. I was going to file for divorce anyway, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation. Just trying to extort money from me, huh? Typical of the poor. You have such a poor heart. Depending on my answer, everything can change. There's still an option where we don't divorce. If I say no, you can't reject it, meaning you can't marry Susan, and your marital status will be exposed. Fine, I'll pay the reparation. Just divorce me now. Sign here. Then about property division. How much more do you want to take from me? Reparation should be enough. Remember, we agreed to waive property division, right? So let's make it official. All right, you're not as bad as I thought. Thank you. We then went to a public notary, made a public document for reparation and property division, and then to the city hall to submit the divorce papers, finalizing our divorce. Relieved, I exchanged final words with John. Glad we don't have to divide property. What are you saying? I'm the one who benefits from that. By the way, do you even have assets after paying me reparation? Susan will also claim damages. She mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. That's impossible. I'm marrying Susan. She can't claim that. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. Still living in a fantasy. You committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still married. You think Susan still believes you? Marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Susan will believe me. Believe that if you want. I heard from Susan directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them, you know. About that, I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken property division and been better off. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided property, you would have benefited more. What are you talking about, poor woman? Your family is poor, and you only make $155,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it would be barely $20,000. You don't have any property. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary is indeed $115,000. But you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no interest in me, but I became a director of the American branch. It's not $115,000 per year, but per month. $155,000 per month. So that's an annual income of $1.8 million. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $180,000 a year. $180,000? That can't be true. Of course, I haven't had the chance to spend such an amount, so I've been saving it for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. So I could have received half of that in the property division. You were my spouse after all. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay after all the contempt? You think I'd gladly undo the divorce? If you have that much money, you don't need to claim reparation, right? It's just a small amount for you. He who laughs at 1 cent will weep for 1 cent. This reparation is for the mental anguish you caused me. I'd like to claim more, honestly. And since we've made it official, make sure to pay it, even in installments. I'll be penniless. Also, don't go back to that apartment. Your belongings should have been moved to your parents' house by now. You thought I had few belongings, but that was because I had already moved most of them. Were you that indifferent to me? I can have so little, so I have to go back to my parents' house. They don't know anything yet, do they? Let me explain. Don't say anything. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said, don't ever step over our threshold again, so I have nowhere to go. He collapsed, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused trouble at the police station. Despite my advice, he went back to the apartment. He sat there aimlessly in the empty apartment until the manager called the police, and he was taken away. I'm not sure if it was for obstructing public duties, trespassing, or for the falsified divorce papers. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him. After talking with me and learning about Susan, they decided that apologizing and paying damages to Susan's family came first. They went to Susan's house to apologize, kneeling in front of her family. They settled everything without pressing charges for marriage fraud, even paying for the wedding expenses. I had expected them to sue, so it was disappointing they didn't. So, I decided to pursue legal action against him for forging the divorce papers. John offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't want him to think everything could be solved with money. I wanted him to be convicted and understand the gravity of his actions, even if it cost time and money. I left everything to my lawyer, so it wasn't too burdensome for me. Even though it took time, John was exposed for his actions and the marriage fraud at his company. He couldn't stay there anymore after being detained by the police and subsequently absent without leave. He was eventually fired. He ended up living at his parents' home, working all day at a relative's construction company. His father took all his earnings, leaving him with no income. I thought his parents wouldn't abandon him, but they were stricter than I expected. They paid my reparation and Susan's compensation, planning to make him work like a horse until he repaid everything. He lived in a shed-like place with no electricity, receiving only $5 per day for food, deducted from his salary. They planned to hound and kick him out once he repaid everything. A harsh fate after years of hard work. I was offered a position at the head office abroad, so I moved overseas after the divorce was finalized. I worried John might come to me for help or harbor resentment, but moving abroad alleviated those concerns. I thought work would be my partner for a while, but soon I found a new relationship. I'm now dating a foreign executive at our head office, and I'm pregnant with plans to marry soon. I told him everything about my past and my ex-husband, and he's understanding. I'll take maternity leave and plan to return to work later, supported by him. He's enthusiastic about taking paternity leave and co-parenting, showing a different cultural perspective. After being tormented by my ex-husband, I finally feel I'm grasping true happiness and confidence in building the happy family I'd always dreamed of. Many suffered due to selfish spouses, and while divorce isn't always the right choice, enduring silence isn't a virtue. It's important to know that honest discussions can lead to resolutions, and sometimes divorce is a necessary option.